Okay, welcome everybody. This is Pat Bailey, Director of Training and Professional Development at Out and Equal. We're in Building Bridges toward LGBT Equality Part 2. I want to run through everybody and make sure we've got everybody up online. So let's start with Andres, just a kind of name and who you work with. Go ahead.
I'm Andreas Balceris, and I'm working for Johnson & Johnson in Canada.
Okay, Bianca?
Hi, my name is Bianca Beirudi. I am the Accounting Associate here at Out and Equal.
All right. Brianna?
Hi, I'm Brianna, and I am part of the communications team at Out and Equal.
Okay, Joseph?
I'm Joe Corey. I'm from the Hartford Financial Services Group in Hartford, Connecticut.
All right. Kit?
Hi, I'm Kit. I'm from Out and Equal.
And Marina?
Hi, I'm Marina, and I'm the Executive Assistant here at Out and Equal.
And Melissa?
I'm Melissa Gilpin. I work as a Safeway Human Resources Representative up in the North Coast.
Great. Nina?
Hi, I'm Nina out of New York, and I'm self-employed.
All right. And Tony?
Tony Talbot. I am the Out and Equal CFO. Thanks.
Great. And Roberto, I may have lost you.
Yes, I'm here. Well, I am a researcher in social anthropology, and I'm also working in Oracle as IT engineer.
All right, sounds good. There you are. And anybody else on the line that I missed? So let me correct a couple of things here and get it right. All right, so before I put you on mute and we kind of jump in, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts from last week. I saw some good comments in the reviews. Appreciate that. But anything come up during the week? Any questions from last week's material on terminology and concepts?
Well, some of us, i.e. me, were not a part of the session last week, so I don't know if there's any quick rundown you can give of what was discussed then.
What I'll do is I'll send you guys out the link so that you can review it, and it's all recorded and archived on that. But basically we kind of just talked about different terms and terminology, concepts, history, and spent most of the time just working on that part of it. So it's kind of the background cultural competency. So if something comes up and we use a term or something that doesn't sound familiar, jump in with a chat question and I'll answer that.
Okay.
Perfect. Any other thoughts or ideas from last week? Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and put everybody on mute. I'm going to go through the presentation. There'll be a couple of opportunities to take quizzes and things like that, and we'll have some discussion toward the end. So use the chat. You can type in and send me messages that way, and I'll answer those right as they come up, or I'll do that at the end when we do Q&A. So talk to you in a bit.
The conference has been muted.
Okay, so just a couple of more announcements of things coming up. We do have the virtual summit coming up. The Hurricane Series is starting on February 5th, and we've got that confirmed. It's actually up on the web now. If you go to the training calendar page, you'll be able to see the link to all of those 6 sessions that we had at the summit that we're going to redo. Those are going to be free to listen to as live webinars, and there'll be a small fee if you want to buy the package after the fact. Lots of other things going on. Coming up next month will be Train the Trainer. So many of you I know are taking Building Bridges to take that course. So that sign-ups are available if you haven't signed up for that course already to take that. And when you complete the Train the Trainer course, you'll be certified as a Out and Equal diversity trainer for leadership diversity in the workplace for 2 years. If you're thinking about the summit, we're having our kickoff webinar there on the 20th of February, and we also have our executive forum and our leadership celebration coming up in April. We talked a little bit last week on how to operate on the webinar. You can see during the presentation your lines will be muted, and you can use the chat box down here, type in the information, and you can then hit send, and I'll see the questions as they come across. If there's any technical problems, raise your hand, and I'll try to address those if you can't hear me. If we do polls, when they come up on the screen, go ahead and answer those, select submit, and you'll see the results. And again, if you have problems or you want to review any of this, it will be recorded, and you'll be able to see it in a few days and replay it if there was any information that you wanted. Since we're into part 2, we're going to be taking a look today more on the business case. We're going to look at what's happening with employees in terms of benefit packages, what the employee experience is in the workplace, how to address customers, and a little bit about developing allies. We'll spend a lot more time on that in part 3, but that's kind of where we're going today. So let's take a beginning look on the impact in the workplace. And I've got a poll for you right away here. And this is an option to select all of those that apply about your demographics and who you are. So are you racially and ethnically diverse? Are you a college graduate? Are you and your partner employed? Are you raising a child? Are you a veteran? Do you have a partner who's disabled? And are you over 55? So you can click on those, and the box will come up, and it'll show who's on the call. And looks like we've got almost everybody in there. So it looks like we've got about 100% college graduate. We've got 11% racially and ethnically diverse. You and your partner are employed, about 30%. Raising a child, 9%. Veteran, 9%. Partner who's disabled, 18%, and over 55, 9%. So you can see we're a pretty diverse group. If you take your stereotypes and myths that we talked about from part 1, in reality, just in this small group, we see a lot of differences. And we know that when we take a look at demographically across the U.S., we see that there's a lot of correlation between same-sex couples and married couples. A lot of this information comes out of the Census and the Williams Institute and the numbers that have come in. And you can see that very close matching with the married population, so opposite-sex couples and same-sex couples, around diversity, around college graduate, LGBT seems to be a little bit higher. Both employed, has had a child, not quite as high as married couples, but still significantly higher. Veterans about the same, partners with disabilities, and age 55 and older. One of the other areas that we always talk about, one of the myths that's out there, is the LGBT community makes more money and has more disposable income. You can see here that the median family income when this survey was done shows that it was not as significant as married couples. So what you have is LGBT individuals in the workplace who want the exact same things that everyone else in the workplace wants. You want job stability, you want to be able to make money, to buy a house, to build your family, do all the things that you want to do. Unfortunately for LGBT employees, that is not always the case, because if we look at the U.S. map, we see here that the states that are in blue have protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So if you're an employee, you can't be fired because you're LGBT. In the states that are in white, there's no protections, and in pink, it's just sexual orientation protections. So let's say that I work for a company here in California, and it's a good company, and they've got a good score on the Corporate Equality Index, and they're able to protect and I don't get fired. But let's say that my manager says, I'd like to transfer you and give you a promotion to go to Texas. And in going to Texas, my partner's going to go with me, and let's say my partner's a school teacher. And I might consider that and say we both need to work, we both need to have a job, and my partner won't be protected in the schools in the area that we're going to live, and so she might be fired just because it's known that she's a lesbian. So I might say to my boss, explain all that, and say, well, I can't take that job. My boss would understand that, and we'd have the discussion. But imagine if I was in the closet and I knew all this, but I just said to my boss, no thanks, boss, I don't want to take the job. And all of a sudden you'll see a situation where if another job comes up, my boss doesn't consider me a team player. So it's one of the aspects of why we continue to push in the United States for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would make a protected class based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Right now it's a state-by-state kind of situation, and there's changes coming. We're hopeful with the return of the administration in the next 4 years. But right now there are no protections, and it's one of those realities you have to be aware of. Now, in light of that, corporations have been doing a lot of work to protect their employees, and that's a lot what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, let's take a look at the rest of the world, because it's bad enough that you can lose your job, but imagine that you're sent somewhere like Saudi Arabia, and here the purple countries are states that have state-mandated death penalties for being LGBT. Now again, primarily these are regarding gay men or transgender women, and but anyone who is LGBT or perceived as LGBT could be put to death by state laws. A lot of these other kind of lighter colors here all have basically prison sentences for up to life if you're found out to be LGBT. And you see the greens here have basically protections based on marriage or civil unions or some form of being able to be couples. You can see here in the United States, you see some of these dots here that are happening. That's because as a country, we don't have all those protections. And if there's the striped lines here, those are countries that have protections based on workplace discrimination. The kind of light brownish tan color here, it's not clear what the laws are in those countries in those areas. So you can see those protections aren't there. But you can see a good part of the world has a lot of those protections up here in Europe. We're beginning to see more and more in South America, which we don't see in the United States. So we've got some of those coverage. And Canada's got a lot of that. Can't quite pick out Spain here, but you can see that there's some good coverages. And the EU, to be a member of the EU, you do have to have those protections. So when we talk about a workplace, one of the tools that Out and Equal has developed is called the 20 Steps to Workplace Equality. And this takes a look at what are the basic components that you have to do to make sure your employees are engaged, involved, and are protected in the workplace. And we're going to talk about each one of these a little bit today, but we're going to kind of start with equal policies and benefits, because that's really where things start. And we know that there's a lot of ways to measure this. So I'm going to ask another poll question here to say, are you with a company that has a corporate equality index? And if so, what's your score? So you can look through there. You've got 91 to 100%, 81 to 90%, 71 to 80, 61 to 70, less than 60%. Yes, but you don't know the score. No, we're not rated. For example, like Out and Equal doesn't have a rating because we're a nonprofit, not a corporation. Or it's not applicable. You're self-employed, and looking at that. So what we see on the call is about 27% have that 91 to 100% rating. About 18% have over 80. Nobody in that middle ground. We've got 8% that are not sure of the score, and about 25% that aren't rated or it's not applicable. So again, we see a good range, but again, what we find is companies that we work with are already doing a lot of these steps because they're trying to find out what it is that LGBT employees want. And I know Roberto just sent me a note that said on the ILGA should use Peter's map. There's a better reference in that. So I'll take a look at those, Roberto, and thanks for the reference on the global map. That'll be great. Because what LGBT employees are looking at, no matter where they are, is they want those non-discrimination policies that are going to protect sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. It's an area that we think about if we go back to the basic concepts idea, is that gender expression and how someone looks sometimes helps people create those stereotypes in their mind. And so you might not be LGBT, but you might be too masculine or too feminine for a job that people think you should be in, and you could be fired just because of the way you look. Then obviously you have benefits, health insurance, and all benefit packages, and then family benefits. Can you take care of your family and get relocated on international assignments or time off to take care of your family? These are automatically given to many employees that are opposite sex and married, but not necessarily always thought about with companies. And you have to go through the process of working on these benefits one at a time. And then the last area that we're starting to talk about and look at more is how do you analyze this in the workplace? If I ask a company anywhere in the world, they'll tell me how many women they have at the executive level or how many people of color left the company last year. What can they tell me about their LGBT population? So again, it keeps a safe working environment for everyone. And I want to give one example of how this impacts, because we have the companies that are working with us who have these. They got 100% on that corporate equality index. They're doing really, really well, both in the U.S. and globally. But they say, okay, you've got policy, you've got benefits. What else do you want? We don't quite understand. Well, here in the United States, when you get married, because of the laws of the United States, you get 1,138 rights around taxes, inheritance, property, all of those kind of things that happen within your own estate. And one of those is around taxes. and your insurance. So here we have an example of two employees, Steve, who's married to an opposite-sex partner, and Jim, who has a domestic partner. They do the same work. And so Steve, when he gets his health insurance taken out to get that taken care of, on an average nationally, that's a little over $1,000. So his taxable income goes down. He pays taxes, and then Jim, in the same situation, pays the taxes on the full $3,200. And what happens is that then they take the domestic partner insurance out. And so what you have Steve, who's just paid that $1,069 before taxes, but additionally now Jim pays additional. Now, in countries where health insurance is universal and everyone has it, not so much of an issue with there. But I found when I taught in Costa Rica, I looked at their medicine, and they said, all employees, you have socialized medicine, everyone gets health insurance. But what I found out is that private insurance is highly valued there. And so in this particular company, when an employee became a manager, they would be offered this private insurance. And so the company had to go back and take a look to add domestic partner benefits for their employees, for their managers as they moved up to that, because they had not thought about that before, and now they have out LGBT managers who want to take advantage of those family benefits. So you have to kind of look and understand your system and provide more information about how you get those protections. I've got a list of companies that are doing this already, and it's kind of a long list. There's a resource and a link I can send you if you want to check, or if you see your company on there or not on there. This is actually through Human Rights Campaign. They have a coalition of companies that are doing tax equity, and that's what this is called, to make that tax equal, and a few more companies in there. But again, when you look at your benefits, don't just say, yes, we all have health insurance benefits, or we all can have relocation benefits, but is there any additional cost, or is there any tax, or any differences in the way you have to apply? When I worked in Honeywell, they would let me go ahead and have domestic partners, but instead of just calling the HR office at my local place, I ended up having to call all the way up to the headquarters in New Jersey, because they didn't have the form, they didn't know how to apply it, and when they sent me the information, instead of just being able to say, here's my wedding certificate, so I want to add my domestic partner, I had to do things like proof that we were living together for at least 6 months, we had a joint account, had to sign an affidavit that we intend to stay together. So there was a lot more paperwork for me to do. So as a person, yes, I had the benefits, but it took a lot more work, and many LGBT employees choose not to come out to so many levels just to get that benefit. And so it was a different kind of situation to actually sign up. So right now, we've got some interesting developments in the United States. Up at the federal level, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has actually said you can't discriminate against individuals based on their race, religion, sex, and included gender identity. There was recently a case in 2012 called the Macy case that was about a man who applied for a job, then began transition, updated the federal agency to let them know that she had transitioned, and they said she was no longer eligible for the job. And so she filed suit, went up to EEOC, and they said, in fact, you can't discriminate against someone just because of the sex and gender that they are. We've also seen 2 cases back in 2011 about gender stereotyping, which says just because you're marrying a woman, that doesn't make you a real woman, or if you were a real man, you'd have a wife and things like that. So it's kind of harassment things are happening. We're beginning to see some movement on the federal level to get those protections. Now, it doesn't stop that in the workplace, but it provides the avenue where you can at least bring it up and have the discussions, because many times I know in the EU, even though the protections are all in place, many times individuals don't feel comfortable talking about their relationships in the workplace because they feel like they might not get promoted or they might not be professional. So regulations and policies alone don't take care of that. We're going to talk in a minute about transgender benefits, but let me drop in another quick question here just so we understand. So this is a kind of a U.S.-based question, but what situations would be covered under that Title VII? That's the gender protections. Not being hired because you've transitioned, not a real woman without a man, not a real man if you don't marry, all the above or none of the above. So go ahead and submit your answers there. And think about if you're outside the U.S., how does that work for within your companies? You know, how do you deal with issues of harassment when comments are made, and what's the process? Does your company have a good process for being able to make sure that doesn't happen and there's respect in the workplace? Looks like about 62% have said all the above, which is true, and about 40% talking about transition. Now, the Macy case has gotten a lot of publicity, and that's true. That is the case that seemed to really open it up, talking about gender identity and protections under Title VII. But in fact, there have been those two other cases in 2011 that talked about sexual orientation as well. So any of those kind of comments at work all apply, so it should be all the above there. Well, we mentioned transgender now, so let's talk about benefits a little bit. And in the United States, what people are looking for is basic health insurance. Of course, that you have that. You know, if you break your arm, you get to go in and you'll be taken care of. But all the transition costs, the coverage for hormone therapy, psychotherapy, voice training, electrolysis, and then the second stage of that in terms of sexual reassignment surgeries and leave to do that, our company is providing that. And what we're finding, again, globally, in many cases, it's under insurance, it can be paid, but many countries, again, you don't want to have the discussion to let people know that you're transgender. So is your company supporting you in that? I also get a comment a lot that says, well, you know, it's going to really cost a lot if we go ahead and implement these kind of policies, because that's pricey kind of insurance. And what we found is after studies, everybody in your company, when you assign, transition benefits, is not going to go out and have a transition. Remember that $1 million question we had in part one. A very small pool of individuals will take advantage of those benefits, and it doesn't add anything more to the plan than any other significant life change, such as diabetes or cancer. And it is support for the employees. And employees now are starting to shop around, that if a company does have transgender health benefits and in your sector, and you don't, your employee may leave to go to another company to take advantage of those benefits. We also get the comment again about having sexual reassignment surgery, that's cosmetic surgery or any of the other changes that happen with that. And again, you go back to the WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health Policies, that says here's the treatment of care for someone who wants to change their assigned or birth sex to match their gender identity, that there is a medical process for that, and it's not just cosmetic surgery. So again, those are good places to have discussion. But there's other workplace issues for transgender employees as well. We talked about last time that back in the mid-'90s, sexual orientation wasn't talked about in the workplace very much. And when it was started to be brought up when the Employment Non-Discrimination Act was brought up, and globally as changes became apparent that was happening all over the world, especially in Europe and Canada, we began to see people were afraid. They didn't know what it was about. They were concerned about who these people were in the workplace based on sexual orientation. Well, now after almost 15 years, most people know someone who is LGB and are much more comfortable with having that discussion and know that sexual orientation varies and is in the workplace. But for many individuals in the workplace, gender identity issues are brand new to them. They don't know the words. They don't know the terminology. They don't know what to ask. They don't know what it's about. So you have a lot of reactions from management and from coworkers. We also continue to have a discussion about the bathroom issues. You know, if someone who was born a man is now a woman is going to go into the women's restroom, is that a concern? And in fact, as far as the data we've been able to find, and organizations like the National Center for Transgender Equality keep track on those kind of information, no one who's transgender has ever gone into a restroom and harassed someone or been predatory in their behavior. We also recommend that a lot of companies go for single-use or community restrooms, so it's not man or woman, and locking doors and stalls where you have privacy. So it's an area that a lot of people react to, but it is actually something that companies can work on. Obviously, you have to think about communications, employee records, pronoun use, and an interesting challenge for companies now. We've kind of been doing a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 years to talk about when a person announces they're transgender, they may begin a process of change. But in fact, many people may not change. They may just want to change their pronouns or change their name, but they're never going to do any medical intervention. But then we also are seeing now coming up more gender fluidity, individuals who feel both male and female, and how do you address that in the workplace and help employees understand that fluidity. So there's a lot of things to think about as you're beginning to work with gender identity, but they're no different from the areas that we've talked about before with sexual orientation. Things that companies have to consider is, again, we talk about the insurance and related to medical treatments, restroom access. Dress codes, are they gender neutral? Or do you say men will wear suits and not allowing someone who is transitioning to change? Most companies we're finding these days are actually getting rid of dress codes or leaving it as generic as business professional or business casual. Again, looking at your policies on how to make it safe for everyone about reporting procedures, and then how do you update your documentation in the workplace and make that work? For the managers, it's an important part to understand, to know your company policy. You know, is it protected in your discrimination policy? Is gender identity there? And what's the words and how do you use that? Because an employee may walk into you any day and say to you, I'm thinking about transitioning from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. How do you do that? And how to be sensitive to those special concerns, privacy issues, those kind of areas, and making sure you can support your employees if they come to you. And also advise colleagues not to spread information or misinformation about an employee who might be transitioning, and stopping all those gossips that might happen. A lot of it, though, is about the coworker, and we'll look at some data later that coworkers are some of the most important aspects of an employee's transition, whether they're LGB or T, because for many folks, when you decide to come out in the workplace based on your sexual orientation, it is as traumatic as if you were transitioning in the workplace, too. So we all come out. But make sure that you're present and aware when management's talking about that and training. Be aware that not all transgender individuals follow the same pattern. Sometimes employees don't want a lot of publicity. They might, come back after being off for 3 weeks, and their new name is there, and that they don't want to be asked anything about it. In the United States, they're protected by a privacy act called HIPAA, where you can't reveal medical information. And in the EU, there's a lot of privacy protections as well. So it's not something you can walk up and ask someone about, hey, what surgeries did you have or what went on? That was inappropriate to ask those kind of questions. The number one thing that all of us can do, especially when someone transitions, is to use the correct name and reference pronouns when you're talking, he and she, him and her. And it's normal to make a mistake. If you've known an employee for a long time, I've got a friend of mine that I've known for probably almost 25 years, and every once in a while, I knew him before he transitioned, I'll still use she. I don't know where it comes from, but it comes out. And it's a normal mistake to kind of make that. But don't take offense if the individual corrects you. And also look at your own motivation, because many times, for example, a woman gets married in the workplace. She changes her last name. We learn pretty quickly to use that new last name because we go, all right, we get corrected once or twice, hadn't seen her, we use the new name, and we're comfortable with that. We should be doing the same approach with someone who's transitioned. We should be able to adjust to that. And again, refrain from treating that individual any differently, and they should be treated with sensitivity and respect and confidentiality. Just some other best practices that we're seeing in the United States, self-identification, global support for LGBT employees, a lot of the soft benefits, things like bereavement leave. And I know, again, when I was at Honeywell, I ended up having to take vacation time because my partner's grandmother died, and to go to the funeral, even though the company had a good score, they hadn't looked at their bereavement leave and didn't include their domestic partners. Life insurance, relocation and travel, adoption assistance. What about things like annuities and pre-retirement survivor qualifications? All of those things that you talk about that a family needs, that are benefits that you get in the company, many times for LGBT employees you don't get because nobody's asked, it hasn't been researched, the wording hasn't been changed to indicate that it's a husband or a wife. So you really have to check all of the policies. and getting time off for your family or gender identity issues. So in all this, corporations have done a lot to make these changes and make these awarenesses happen. But I want to bring it back to us and ask you a question now, just for your own kind of learning. How knowledgeable do you feel about transgender and bisexual issues in the workplace? Well, we talk a lot about sexual orientation. If you are knowledgeable, then you strongly agree or agree. And if not, you're neutral, you're not sure. More in the middle, in neutral, or if you disagree that you don't have a lot of knowledge in there, it's a good self-check for yourself to kind of see where you are on that. So it looks like we've got everybody in, and we've got about 18% strongly agree, about 50% agree, and about 25% neutral. So good. I mean, as a group, we've kind of got some knowledges on this. There's always more to learn. I'm learning things every time I make a call and talk with other organizations that are working on these issues. So it continues to grow and be a good opportunity to learn more. So that's a lot of what the employees are looking at. That's what they're trying to get, and their importance in the workplace, and what they want out of that benefit package, because it's like I think 30 or 40% of your benefit package, your pay, is not money. It's about these kind of benefits that you can use. So let's talk now a little bit more about what the companies are looking for and what they want to do. In this case, what we've got is talent management and professional development. And we're talking here about retention and performance, because the number one reason to leave a job is a negative relationship in the workplace. When you have to replace an employee, it costs about 150% of their annual salary to advertise it, onboard them, get them up to speed and productive at the same level as the employee who left. So it's a cost to the company if an employee leaves. And we'll see later that many times employees leave because some of the other companies have better benefits, or they have an issue with people in the workplace, or they just don't feel like they're being valued in the workplace. So to be successful performers, you've got to get somebody in the right job with the right skills and talents and interests. You get onboarded, you understand the organization's mission and values, and then you're considered valued for your unique contributions as part of a team. And that bringing your whole self to work and being able to be there every day and 100% focused on the job and engagement is what companies are looking for as one of their goals. But imagine, I know if I'm coming up on a vacation and let's say I'm going on a cruise, the week or two before I go on that cruise and I'm getting all the extra trips and the boarding documents and all that, I'm probably thinking about what I'm going to pack, what trips am I going to take, excursions I'm going to see, what I'm going to do, and I'm not fully engaged in my workplace. We all have a hard time achieving that 100%. But imagine that you were much more in a longer period of time unable to really have those discussions and be there. So we're going to do what's called a dyad exercise. And I'm going to ask if, why don't we get Tony and Melissa both to tell this story. So I'm going to unmute both of you real quick. So if you could unmute your lines. Melissa, you're up, and Tony, you're up.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm going to have you do is just think about for a minute something you've done this last weekend or recently with somebody that's important in your life. It could be a partner, kids, family, whoever that might be. And you're just going to tell a real quick Monday morning, what'd you do this weekend kind of story. And you're going to just share that with another coworker, so appropriate to that level. But I've got a couple of rules that we're going to do with this. You can't use a person's name. You have to change their relationship, so if it's a husband, wife, brother, sister, and then you have to change the pronouns. So, Tony, I'm going to start with you and let you go first on that. So go ahead and tell your story. What did you do this weekend?
We went to San Francisco to look at properties since we're relocating from San Diego to San Francisco.
And what did you do while you were up here?
We went and looked at properties, we went out to eat, we walked all over the city and had a great time. As you notice, I'm not saying she. I'm avoiding saying anything to that. I'm just saying we. Exactly.
Melissa, how about you? What did you do this weekend?
Well, we went to a memorial service, actually, and my wife made about 300 servings of fruit compote and cider, and she served it at the service all day long.
Great. So how was that? Tony, you kind of had the convention there of we, and I see Melissa trying to pick it up. But how did it feel?
I haven't had to do that in 25 years, so it's sort of a problem. I mean, saying we or they is something that I did a long time prior to coming out at work. I just haven't had to do it for a while, so you really have to think about, and that was part of the thing. It's always like there's a facade and you're pretending, and it just takes too much effort. It's exhausting after you have to do that all day long.
Right. Melissa, how about for you?
Well, it was just really awkward to try and describe my husband as my wife, or to, say rather than, he served the fruit compote at the service, just is awkward to try and switch your mindset.
Right. And I'm going to go ahead and put you both on mute, so thank you for that again. And you can see, I, like Tony, I have done this for years, and so it's something that's like riding a bicycle, that you get back into it and you can fall into the conversation. It sounds fairly normal. But again, what's happening is when you're retelling the story, you have to revision the picture. You actually have to change your memories. And so Melissa found that a little harder, and you heard a little more delay and engagement in that. A lot of times people will keep their stories real short. If you ask them a follow-up question, they almost don't seem real comfortable with that because they're working to have a conversation rather than just having a conversation. So this is a great exercise because you can help someone understand how difficult this would be if you were in the workplace and you couldn't talk about who you were. Now, what if Tony made a mistake and did say he, or that his partner, was a man, and he wasn't out at work? He might go back to his workplace and worry the rest of the day about maybe my team heard that, my boss is, we've been doing some promotion talking. Is this going to be in the problem here? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to lose my job? Do I have to sell my house? All those kind of issues that can come along with making that mistake that totally takes you away from that engagement. And then as a listener, as an ally, if you heard that, you could just say, oh, cool, I didn't know that you had a partner. What's his name? What's going on? And that opens up the door to be able to have those discussions. But this is a great exercise to take back to your workplace. And if you only have 5 minutes at a meeting, to do it with everybody, have them pair up, let everybody tell their stories and switch it and get some feedback with that. Because it is a very, just like it was with the $1 Million Question discussion, it talks about how would you feel if you had to do this all the time. And it's about why you need to be yourself and be able to just talk about who you are at work and details that come up on Monday morning before meetings. Because for many LGBT employees, they won't go to the social aspects or go down and get coffee or be early to the meeting because they don't want to have these discussions. So their coworkers begin to say, wow, they're not much of a team player, they aren't showing up for things, they just aren't part of the team. So again, it impacts your ability to perform with your team as well as your own career. So some of the things to think about in terms of retention and recruiting is things like the relocation. How do you attract skilled personnel? Look at recruiting on LGBT boards, such as our own CareerLink, for looking for LGBT-positive companies, both as a company as an individual, to find companies where you'd feel comfortable. Again, just because they're listed there may not mean that if you're in a small Midwest town that it's going to be the same as San Francisco, but it does give you the opportunity to at least check out a company and be willing to be open on that. Again, providing diversity training and awareness on LGBT issues, especially around middle management. Many times headquarters are great, but a middle manager goes, well, I don't know exactly how I'm going to be able to do this. So what we are recommending to many companies is if diversity is part of your values or your goals for your performance evaluation each year, is why not put having a diverse team as one of your middle manager goals? And that includes women, people of color, different generations, LGBT. And all of a sudden your middle managers are very keen on making sure that they keep all of their employees satisfied and working well, because that diverse team translates into money for them in their reviews and promotions. So it's a good way to do that, as well as reviewing all your policies and make sure that all the supporting scripts. So you're good within the company, but let's say I have to call for insurance, an outside company, and they don't quite understand how to talk about transgender or sexual orientation, and I feel uncomfortable talking to them. I feel like I have to educate them. So it's good to make sure that all those suppliers that you have also understand your policies and the way they expect conversations to go with their employees. Also can help with immigration status, imagine that you're working in another country, you fall in love, you meet someone, you want to come back to the United States. Many of the immigration issues are a little tough to do that, and working with foreign national partners. And also looking at international assignments and trips for LGBT employees. I know as a woman in the military, when I was there and I went to Saudi Arabia, they had a long presentation for me, but also for the men as well, that talks about being a woman in a Middle East country and how to act and what the rules are and how you should be. We should also include that kind of discussion about LGBT issues in countries where it's dangerous or not supportive of LGBT employees, so everyone is aware of that and can be helpful whether you're out or not. One area that really helps in this area is employee resource groups, and they're known by different names: business resource groups, affinity groups, diversity councils, special emphasis program if you're working within the government. And they come together not just as LGBT, but any organization, traditionally women, people of color, again, generations are many of the groups that do that, to talk about how they can help the company and be more engaged and do more education and advance their employees within the company. And most employee resource groups are also open to allies. So I know many of your companies have that, and it's a lot of the reasons that we connect with so many folks when we come to the summit, because you're a resource for HR and management. If you're interested in how to form a group, we've got some courses and information on that if your company doesn't have that. But I can come in and teach a one-day course, but it's your employee resource group members who are going to be there every day, know the right people to talk to, and really make change in the company. And when we talk about the change, we've got those first two boxes checked off. We've got policies, benefits, we're talking about good talent, you can be out in the workplace, and you're available. But let's talk about climate a little bit and see what that looks like. And when you evaluate climate, this is a study called The Degrees of Equality. It came out in 2009. They asked a question about how frequently do you hear jokes or negative comments at work, and how often it happens. And there's three categories here. There's total employees in the study. You have an EEO policy that is LGBT inclusive, is the red, and the yellow says EEO policy is not inclusive. And they asked this pool of survey folks, if someone tells a joke about another minority group, you can still see there's pretty high percentages, way up into the 60 and high 50% for companies that have inclusive policy, but even higher if you don't have an inclusive policy. And then we start talking about LGBT jokes or comments or negative views, still really, really high scores. So that even if you see a negative view expressed in a company that has an inclusive policy, it's still 43% if you have those policies, 52% if you're not. And you've heard supervisors make those comments. So we know that even with the policy, it doesn't automatically improve the situation. What employees do when they hear these kind of comments, about 67% ignore it and don't say anything at all and just go on. About 35% confront the person, 9% will talk to their supervisor, and 5% will go to HR. HR is so low because for a long time, and HRs are changing and they're getting much better at this, they would say to the individual, well, if you just didn't act so gay or whatever the X was, people will not make those comments about you. HR is taking those more seriously now and actually addressing those issues. But I know my boss, when I was at Honeywell, knew I was a lesbian, and we were doing a team exercise one day, and team members were getting into cars together and trying to get the fastest time at the little Monte Carlo track that was there. And two guys were getting in one car because we had more men than women, and he made some comment about, look at those two guys, I didn't know they were together kind of thing. And I looked at him and I said, Mike, what are you doing? What kind of comment is that? He goes, oh, no, that wasn't anything bad or negative. Yeah, I know, it's cool, But again, if I was not an out employee and I heard that message that we get about it's better to be in the closet, don't be out, it's really not okay, comes through. And as employees, if we're worried about our careers and our profession, we're not going to come out and be who we are. And there's some good studies from this Degrees of Equality about why people don't come out. And the number one highest rated is because it's nobody's business is how LGBT employees feel. That's why I'm not going to come out. I might make you feel uncomfortable. I might be stereotyped. We talked about a lot of those. On a professional level, we might lose connections and relationships, or I might not get promoted, or I might be perceived as unprofessional. And then kind of on a safety area, we see about lack of policies to protect me, fear of getting fired, fear for my personal safety. We still get calls from time to time with individuals who have their posters or pictures torn down from their workplace cubicles or their cars keyed and things like that because they have a rainbow flag. Or you've just, in the past, you've experienced humiliation and you don't want to do that again. So for a lot of employees, there's a lot of reasons they don't want to come out. And again, that climate in the workplace is an important part. They followed up this study and they then asked this same group, what happens to you in the workplace? Have any of these happened in the last 12 months because of being LGBT? Now, this was specifically about, these are things you thought about because you're concerned about how someone would react to being you being LGBT. And again, we have three sections here, all LGBT. The red here is now not open to anyone at work, and the yellow is open to everyone at work. So we see here on had to lie about your personal life, even though you could be out based on policies, and it should be okay and you're out, you still had to lie about something that you did because you didn't feel comfortable. I know for me, again at Honeywell, I had a sense that I was told by management I could be out within the company, but not to let our customers know, who was Department of Energy, that I was a lesbian. Now they had a great group, and I was the co-president of Pride, and most of them all knew me already that way. But the company felt that that was going to somehow hurt our company and our business. So it gave me a message that I had to, not quite be myself. Maybe feel depressed, avoided people, avoided social events if I don't feel comfortable bringing my partner. You can see, again, even being out, those are still fairly high numbers that you've got. You're exhausted, you searched for another job, you've avoided your clients and customers, stayed home from work, and avoided certain people in the office. These are all factors that, again, when we go back to that engagement number, says we're not working as hard as we could because there's other issues happening that keep us from doing our best and doing our job. So when we address climate, one of the recommendations we're making is doing voluntary LGBT self-identification. A lot of people do that through annual surveys, and what they're finding is that many companies have said after a couple of years, we've surveyed our employees, we've asked them do they identify as LGBT, and we found that the general satisfaction, let's say, is 52%. Maybe our LGBT employees is 41%. Don't know why, because you still have good scores and you think you're doing everything right, but there's still something within that group that doesn't make them feel comfortable. So now there's some numbers and some metrics that companies can use to begin to take a look and see how they're doing with companies. So we've got some legal considerations here that we talk about. There's a report that's out that has a lot of these answers about privacy and confidentiality, a planned approach, best practices. How do you do this? You've got to have a plan. Don't just ask the question and not do anything about that. And how do you do that globally? And I know Roberto's got a question. He goes, I'm not sure I understand the meaning of all LGBT. Does it refer to a workplace where all people are LGBT? And that's okay. I'll answer you now, Roberto. The table it was all the people in the study, all the LGBT in the study, and of that percentage, the percentage that were out at work and the percentage that were not. So it was just within the study and how they reacted in their individual workplaces, which for the most part were not all LGBT employees. So once you've got the data collected, you have to know what to do with it for climate surveys. Here's some sample questions that have been recommended. A general one, do you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? And you can see right away if this popped up in a survey, there's probably some education and some outreach you had to do before this. The Employee Resource Group is helpful for that, as well as training and diversity, and HR can help get the word out so people understand why these questions are being asked. You can also ask specifically about sexual orientation, about gender identity, and a new one that we've been talking about is to ask about allies. Do you know someone in the company who is LGBT? And we have a theory that says that if the company overall says, 72% says yes, we do know someone, and in one particular area of the country the number is only 15%. The theory is that there are LGBT people in that company, but they're just not out, and what's kind of happening there for the climate. So it also engages everyone to say that there's a portion of this that you're involved in. When you ask LGBT individuals, because a lot of companies say, well, we can't ask that or that they don't want to be asked, Degrees of Equality study said that 72% would answer that question if asked. Now, some people are beginning to put it in their HR records because that's a much more important piece about being able to track how many executives, retention in the company, and those areas. So that's a growing area right now. We think that in the next couple of years in the Corporate Equality Index, this will be a standalone item that the company needs to be doing this. And it's happening globally as well. What are companies doing? So this is part of the criteria. So I keep talking about the Corporate Equality Index, and I just want to mention here that that change has happened for self-ID. In 2013, 44% of the companies, or 302 companies, report that they either do survey or HR records for Safe ID. So once you've got that implementation of that plan, they're beginning to gather data and what it can do, and then they're going to be able to take the next steps. What do they need to do as a company to change that? Is that focus groups, other areas? Companies have done this around women, around people of color. If they see they're leaving before they move up in management, they start to take steps and say, how can we improve these numbers? And that's what we're hoping will happen with LGBT employees as well. So that talks a lot about climate, and there's a lot more work to do there, but it's a start. Companies also think about advocacy and corporate responsibility. This is an area where you begin to talk about it's more than your services. It's where you stand on things like environment, global economics, supporting emerging groups in the workplace, ethics, and fair policies. And companies are judged by this, how well they do and what's their reputation in the general community. It also provides a company with an opportunity to impact in a positive way change in their communities, their environments, and the world as that goes. And trying to find the best practices about how to get involved in LGBT equality, companies are always asking us that and how to do that. So there's an interesting survey that we work with. It's called Business of Change. And it was a study that was done by the Gill Foundation and Weber Shandwick back in 2009. And they decided they wanted to come out with a resource guide for corporations and nonprofits, how to do collaborations. And they brought together a research fellowship program. They had advisory boards of experts from nonprofit and corporate sectors. And they published this Business of Change guide in 2009. It had some great stories in there, some great suggestions, and it was a resource that was available to the community. But they didn't want to stop there, so they said, how could we take this guide online and create a more digital experience? And so Out and Equal was selected as a long-term partner to work with Gill to lead this project, and we now have a website that helps nonprofits and corporations get together. And it talks about, instead of being sponsors, the traditional model of I go to a company, I ask for X amount of money, they give it to me, I give them a thank you gift or a plaque. How do we become partners with each other? For example, a food company partnering with a food bank, volunteers. There's a lot of other areas to work with. And this really helps for companies get their employees engaged, because one of the company values is that we begin to let our employees go work on their passion. Great example, Habitat for Humanity. When a company comes on board, they'll bring out a whole team, construct a house in a day, great team building, great opportunity. But there's lots of other opportunities that can happen there for leadership development, maybe being on a nonprofit board in lots of areas. So if it's something that you're thinking about, how do I get my company more engaged in the community, these are real tangible ways to do that. So let me ask just use the audience as we talk about global a little bit more. How has your HR, your employee resource group, been around global issues? Are you doing any of these things globally with your company and within the ERG? So take a look at those and pick all that apply if you're working with a company that is global. Again, just skip to results if you're in a company that is just local or it does not apply. And we'll see what folks have done. Have been doing global analysis. How are things happening for LGBT employees? Do you know that there's other employee resource group members in other places? Do you conduct global training calls around diversity? Has HR begun to talk about relocation and working that help for your family, but also for your LGBT employees? Do you have global benefit and policies? What we found originally when we first started looking at this area, we found that many individuals would say, we have diversity based on what the local community says it's okay to do. So although you might be protected on sexual orientation and gender identity in the U.S. and in the EU, you went to another country where it was against the law, those protections wouldn't be for the employee. So how do you have a global workforce? Talking about immigration, changing the country laws, highlighting your global accomplishments. So we see here we are about 87% are doing kind of global training and calls and working together. About 50% have been highlighting those global accomplishments and talking about what individuals are doing. 37% meet with global ERG members. They're involved in changing the country laws. Again, a Costa Rica story, what I found was that Bank of America, HP, IBM were all working together because Costa Rica is a neutral country. Doesn't have any laws on the book against being LGBT, but it also doesn't call it out in their constitution. And it's becoming a major call center for many of the companies. And so they're saying, if we're going to have our employees here, we want to create a better environment for our employees to work in, so we want you to change your laws. So it's been a good opportunity to be involved and have those discussions of why that's important. Because that global responsibility is kind of where we're going next. It was back in 2006, the Yogyakarta Principles, this was a human rights law, principles finding about what are the rights. Again, we talk about policy is where it all starts. And this laid down a set of policies for sexual orientation and gender identity around the world. And it talks about privacy, protections under the law, freedom of speech. But the right to work is probably one of the important ones for us to look at. Basically, it says everyone has the right to decent and productive work. And those conditions, whatever it takes to make those changes in public and private employment, around recruitment, promotion, dismissal, conditions of employment, payment, and eliminate any bias based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we have a global mandate here, from the United Nations and from the folks that worked on these principles to make these changes. And this basis is what's being taken out around the world, helping individuals have these discussions in their countries and bringing up the differences that they find. Because in all cases, the U.S. may not have the best answer, but we have one of the answers. And looking at other countries and coming up with best practices that work is important. One of the number one things that has to happen in a state is that it becomes legal to be LGBT. So there's not a law against being LGBT. Once that starts, then you can begin to build on that. So many countries are just working on that base first step before they can add into any of these other areas. And so some of those global considerations, if your company is just beginning to talk about that, review your global LGBT policies. Get copies from other regions of the world of what it actually says. And advocate for those employees globally. And is it the same for everyone? Talk to them, get their experience and their stories. Provide that training for all employees on terminology and how to have the discussions. Provide some support, because especially, even if you're in a major city, you might be the only person that you know who is LGBT. And when you connect with someone, it's helpful to be able to begin those discussions in your work area and not just be connected virtually. Support any kind of litigation and political activities, informing international human rights, making sure that people understand there are principles, and then consider the strategies for each of the countries that you're going to. Is a country that your company works in supportive of LGBT issues, neutral, or not supportive? And is that, when you talk about developing the business as a company, what makes sense and how can you influence that and make those changes? Our last and final area is talking about customers and community commitment. And we know that when we talk about diversity, companies need for product development a diverse, inclusive team that's very goal-focused. And you need new ideas, and LGBT employees can bring you an awareness of that community and consumer needs, which again is going to increase your productivity. When we talk about marketing to the LGBT audience, LGBT consumers are very savvy about checking out other companies. They'll evaluate a vendor before they purchase, and they're going to look for a visible presence on your ads or online at events in the community, such as Pride. And there's even a buying for equality guide that HRC puts out based on the Corporate Equality Index. The potential customers have a potential higher per capita disposable income, although a lot of that is a myth. But for example, during the recession, we found that LGBT individuals were continuing to spend money on travel. And so the travel industry jumped on that and put a lot of ads in LGBT publications. But they're also very sensitive to your customer response and are willing to support brands that are LGBT positive. If we look at the competitive markets and in a diverse market, again, this is a U.S. market. There's an estimate of 15 to 16 million LGBT in the United States. That's about 6.7% of adults over 18. And it varies whether you're talking about census data, so there's lots of numbers thrown around. But that for this particular study, that was the numbers that were estimated in the U.S. And then there's that minority buying power, that discretionary income that you can use after you pay your bills. We see the largest growing population is the Hispanic population with over $1 trillion in buying power. African American with $957.3 billion. Number 3 is LGBT. These are 2012 numbers, $790 billion, which is very high for the small size of this population. And that's the per capita, per person, the composite monies that's available. And then the Asian American is next. So a lot of companies are realizing this is an important factor, that if you're going to buy into this sector, you're going to need to start advertising and be positive with that. Because your LGBT customers are an invisible minority. I can walk into a store, and if I'm holding hands with my partner or something like that, and I see a negative scowl, I'm going to react and say this person is negative toward LGBT individuals. Or if I walk in and somebody's making comments or saying things and you don't realize I'm LGBT, I'm going to walk out of that and say I'm not going to deal with this company because I'm very concerned about your judgment, and I might not reveal information like if you're a bank or in health areas about who I am because I'm afraid of that judgment. And so hiding that doesn't let you do your full job. So being aware of your customers, and it goes all the way through the company down to, you know, every area to make sure that individuals from maintenance to the headquarters level begin to talk about and understand LGBT customers and clients. We go back again as we talk about this advocacy frontier about thinking about where you might be able to do things. What else do I need to work on in my company? Do I have the policy and benefits? Do I have LGBT organizations and diversity training? How about marketing and supplier diversity? And if I have a minority supplier program, can I include sexual orientation and gender identity? Companies that are built on LGBT economies and companies. There is an organization in the U.S. that actually certifies companies so that you know they're LGBT owned. And what else happens out as we get further? Global policies, climate surveys. What else can we do as we begin to move forward to what changes? And companies are very creative about what's next. Because when we get to that power of equality, what we end up is more effectiveness for our internal resources. We have a larger pool of people to draw from. You've reduced the urge of people to look for another job because they're satisfied with their work, so because they're engaged. Improved product design and best use of resources, and you're impacting the world with corporate social responsibility. You're making a difference for your employees as well as the company's influence in the world. But then you also have the business case that says, how are you doing with your customer base? You improve your corporate image. You have greater market outreach and sales. You have high repeat sales and brand loyalty and better customer service to work with that. Very common one we always train at hotels when we go to the summit is usually, and a reservation is made, two men walk up to the counter. They go, oh, we're sorry, you've asked for a king-size bed. We'll give you 2 queen beds instead. They must have made a mistake. And it's no, if they're a couple, they want that king-size bed. So again, you know, we just wanted to check and confirm your reservation was right. Just rewording the question without changing anything at all. So I want to do a quick scenario again. This is a scenario about Nancy who's giving a benefits briefing, and then Barb asks the questions about who can use the benefits. So let's take a look at the clip, and then I'm going to open it up for a little discussion here. And again, if you turn up your volume on your computer, you'll be able to hear this.
So as one more part of the package that we've been talking about, we're also for the first time going to be offering health and wellness benefits that include a gym membership, not only for you to take care of yourself, but also because we care about your family. It's also available to your husband or wife and to your kids to be able to use that. So from everything I've talked about, what questions do you have about anything that's in our new package?
Nancy, I have a question for you. I've been with Robert for 10 years, but we're not legally married. Would this benefit apply to us? And I mean, Stanley, he's been with Jason for 6 years. Would this benefit apply to him?
Okay, so we see the situation. Nancy's come in and done the briefing. I'm going to unmute all of our lines here so we can kind of have a discussion on this part. So why is Barbara asking this question?
She's asking the question because Nancy, I believe because Nancy's the words husband and wife, and it seems that her relationship that she has doesn't really fall under one of those definitions, and then also probably Stanley's relationship as well.
Right, so we kind of have two situations where we've got someone who's in a civil union with someone who's married to, not married to an opposite sex, but has been living with someone in that kind of situation. And then we also have an allusion to Stanley that he has a same-sex partner, and can they use this benefit? And again, that's one of those areas where, because of the laws, sometimes it very clearly says husband and wife. How should Nancy respond to Barbara's question?
If she's not prepared for the question, she may not know exactly if husband and wife was used deliberately or if it was just an assumption.
Right. So she might just have to say, I'm good back with you, and I will check with that. So it would be a good HR kind of answer.
She probably could benefit by acknowledging that it is a legitimate question in this day and age, right? And not be at all like, why would you even ask that sort of attitude? But that's a good point, and we'll either get back to you, or if she knew the answer, to be very forthright and restate it as, we acknowledge people in a variety of different memberships, and this is how our company responds.
Great, great. And so this is usually a prepared script, and everybody's done the work, and they've probably been working on this project, and this is supposed to be the celebration of, yay, we made it. What can be done to avoid this situation with future benefit plans?
One way to avoid that in the future is for Nancy or someone who's in her same position, who's giving a presentation like that, using gender-neutral and inclusive language would sort of eliminate that discomfort that LGBT employees might feel when something like this is being discussed.
Exactly, because that's kind of the discussions that you have. It's awkward. You have to ask the question. You're not sure if it's right or wrong with that. So let's see how that briefing might look if it wasn't a situation where that came up. So let's watch the next video.
Already talked about one additional new benefit that we have this year is a health and wellness benefit, which is a gym membership. And that gym membership, like our other benefits, is available to you, your partner, and your whole family to be able to use. What questions do you have about anything we've covered so far?
Nancy, I just want to make sure, you did say partner, so for example, Robert, my significant other of 10 years, would be included in that even though we're not legally married. And like Stanley and Jason, who've been together for 6 years, that would include both of them, right?
Absolutely. Our benefits are intended to be fully inclusive and cover all of our employees and their families. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
All right, so we see that Nancy stepped up and had the briefing ready and knew the answer with that. And a lot of that is about the pre-planning and making sure that individuals have thought about this before the briefing comes up, because you basically kind of tell your employees, oh yeah, we'll change this after the fact, or we'll wait till next year when the benefit negotiations come back up again for a lot of employees. So here's a case where there might not have been anybody who was LGBT in the room or an ally and didn't bring up that question, and now you have to kind of deal with the the, bad internal publicity about, well, they forgot about us again kind of aspect. When you're thinking about this information as part of a business case and how do we give this to all of our employees, how do we say that, it's an important part of moving forward on the business case because it becomes all of our responsibilities and starts to move into that advocate. I'm going to mute the because we're getting close on the end. So there's lots and lots of data and information in this one, and again, it'll be available for you after to take a look at along with the resources, because a lot of those reports, if you're working on these areas, are really helpful. But I wanted to see if there was any other questions that came up. Okay. Well, we'll jump in and we'll get ready for part 3 next week. We're going to talk about developing allies and action plans a little bit more and how to expand that. So kind of thinking about for yourself this week as kind of the homework for the week is to think about what is it that you're working on? What do you need to work on next? There's best practices that are out there that many people are already doing, and it's one of our abilities to kind of bring that together. Because we'll talk about in more depth is what is your next steps? After this class, what are you going to do with this information? How's it going to apply? And so we'll get into that, and there'll be a lot more discussion next week, so bring your thoughts and ideas and what you want to kind of work on, and realize that we'll do real specific action plans. We don't want to just say we're going to have world peace. We want to be able to say who do you need to talk to, when do you need to talk about it to, and get that done. So with that, again, we'll finish up the call. There'll be a short survey, and we'll be back next week for part 3 at 1 p.m. Pacific. And again, lots of information on the website about what's going on. So I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks a lot.